So today we had evidence from 3 pathologists. At the start, we heard evidence concerning Noah's forehead, and Dr. Peter McSorley said that Noah had obvious swelling on his forehead.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Peter McSorley, this is the first time we've heard of this witness. He didn't appear in person, but he did provide a statement. He was the doctor who attended the scene. So if we remind listeners, Noah's body was found between 2 manholes in the culvert in the Translink yard, which is just off the M2 heading north. So Dr. McSorley, he attended the scene on June 27th, 2020. And he gave his statement in evidence on July 8th, so shortly afterwards, and that was read into evidence today by Peter Casey. So he said he had attended the train yard on the day that Noah's body was found. He said Noah's body had been placed in a supine position, which means on his back, on a police body bag, which was then placed on grass at the side of a road within the train yard itself. He said Noah's body was covered with what appeared to be a fine layer of silt, and there was external maceration and peeling of the skin on the hands and feet. Now, I think the maceration that refers to kind of immersion damage, almost like the wrinkles you get in your hand when you're in the bath. It was how it was described in later evidence. But he also noticed there was faint reddening of the skin on Noah's forehead. So he noticed there was a mark at that point. He said there were no lacerations or incisions on the soft tissue on his face, and no obvious signs of trauma to his face at that point. He also noted lesions on Noah's shoulder and knee, and kind of blackening was the words he used to describe it on both knees. And then a second statement given by Dr. McSorley on October 7th, 2022, so sometime after Noah's death, he said he recalled noting obvious swelling in the middle of Noah's forehead, and this is something that the pathologist touched on as well. He said he recalled giving preliminary medical advice at the scene to D.I. Phillips, who was in charge of the investigation at that point. And he also said he recalled providing advice to him regarding the likely cause of death. And then in the third statement, which was dated March 8th, 2026, so very, very recently, that indicated Dr. McSorley had advised D.I. Phillips at the time he was unable to observe any injury that would have been caused by an assault from a third party. He added the cause of death was consistent with drowning, and that the condition in Noah's body was consistent with being immersed in water for a number of days. And he also noticed death could have taken place up to 6 days previous to when Noah's body was found.
So we had 3 pathologists today. There was Dr. Nathaniel Carey, Professor Jack Crane and Professor Marjorie Turner. They all gave evidence simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. That's not unusual. It's not very common, but it wouldn't be something that's never happened before. It's a method that we were told in court was called hot tubbing, where they are allowed to give their evidence simultaneously. There were 3 of them. They couldn't physically fit into the one witness stand, so they actually sat out next to us on the press benches, while a third, that's Dr. Carey, he gave evidence via a video link. So that all happened at the same time, and they were able to kind of go around those. So Mr. Call, again, he read into evidence a number of statements from those pathologists that should give their names. It's Dr. Nathaniel Carey, Professor or Dr. Jack Crane, and Professor Dr. Marjorie Turner. Those are the 3 pathologists that gave evidence, and Professor Turner's was the first, because she was the one who carried out the autopsy on Noah's body after his death on the Saturday, in fact, around 3:30 p.m. And now she said her ultimate finding for the cause of death was drowning, as we have heard before. She noted Noah's body was found face down in the tunnel with his head submerged, and there were hand marks visible on the walls inside the culvert in that area. Her report said that Noah would not have floated down to that point, but he would have made his way in complete darkness to near his final location. She also noted that his nose was intact and that he had natural teeth with metal braces, as we've heard. She said his body was coated in a dark brown, kind of mud-like material, and it had a sort of patchy distribution on his front, so it wasn't all entirely covered. There were immersion changes, that's what we mentioned earlier, the kind of wrinkles you get on his hands and feet, his extremities. So they were also noticed, along with signs of decomposition change on his nose and his eyes.
And we come back to the bruises here at this point as well.
Yeah, there were several bruises. I mean, if you think of the pathologist report, it's very systematic, it's very formulaic. It's broken down into all the instances where things were observed. So there were more than 20 of these where there were separate entries for it. But there were abrasions and bruises in all different areas of his body, his arms, his legs, his torso, his shoulders. And they were noted by the witness. She said that bruising on his forehead then would have been consistent with a significant blunt impact. She said that could have been as a result of a fall, but also consistent with impact or impacts within the culvert, and that his bruises would have been in keeping, those bruises we heard about, in keeping with stumbles or falls, which is painting the picture of him coming through the culvert and kind of stumbling and falling, trying to make his way through. She said, these are her words, there was no evidence to suggest the involvement of another individual. And she also added there was a degree of hypothermia which may have caused disorientation or unconsciousness. And she also noted that analysis for drugs was negative. Dr. Turner also noted the presence of a brown liquid and vegetative matter in Noah's stomach. She said that seems unlikely that any substance is of relevance to his cause of death. And she also added that the condition of his body was not inconsistent with him having died within hours of his last known sighting. So that's something I think new that we heard maybe in court for the first time today, that it would have been fairly close to when he disappeared that the pathologists feel that he would have died. And then in her conclusion, she said Noah's condition was entirely consistent with the cause of death being drowning at that point.
And then at that point, we heard from the second pathologist, Dr. Crane. He also said there was no indication of assault, and he also agreed that the death was due to drowning.
Mm-hmm. His statement was slightly shorter than Dr. Turner's. She's obviously done the autopsy herself. This is more of a kind of consultative role in this. He said that Noah appeared to be healthy with no evidence of natural disease, and he noted the death was due to drowning. Dr. Crane also indicated the condition would indicate he was alive when he entered the tunnel, and that bruising had likely occurred while in the culprit, so he concurred with what Dr. Turner said there. He then said the degree of decomposition and absence of rigor or rigor mortis, I think there was a discussion over pronunciation, that indicated he had died a number of days prior. Death could have occurred on the day of disappearance, he said. There's nothing to indicate he was the victim of an assault.
So at that point, we heard from the third pathologist, Dr. Carey. He agreed with Professor Turner and Dr. Crane as well. He noted that there was no evidence of disease and there was no evidence of a toxicological contribution to Noah's death.
Mm-hmm. So that would chime with what the previous two pathologists also said. He also said that he agreed the cause of death was drowning. He said it was most likely the bruising occurred in the system, which means in the culvert, the drainage system itself. And he said it was potentially the immediate precursor to drowning. So that may mean that he bumped his head and, became disorientated and then drowned after that. So that's what he means by that. He noted Noah's behaviour prior to his experience or his disappearance would have been typical of an acute psychotic episode, but he also added this should be assessed by an expert with more experience in that field and who's qualified to make that assessment.
And there's something we haven't heard before, I don't think, so far. He said that he was unable to exclude the possibility that Noah had been placed in the culvert by a third party.
Mm-hmm. I understand that this comes from questions that would have been asked to kind of prompt the statement from Dr. Carey, but he said that he was unable to exclude the possibility, and that means there's no direct evidence of it happening or not happening. Yep. But he said he couldn't exclude that possibility that he'd been placed in the culvert by a third party and he may have been coerced under threat, which may explain maybe the lack of trauma injuries or that kind of thing. He also reiterated there were no signs of assault identified by the postmortem. And last year he provided a further addendum. He also said that drug ingestion could not be excluded, but further analysis would need to be carried out. So if you think of the toxicology, you test for different drugs in different ways, and it's not possible to test for every single drug, in one go. So I suppose that's what he's saying at that point. There was an agreed response then from all three pathologists following a meeting. That meeting took place in December 2025, where they brought all three together, and they had a number of questions to answer, and they kind of agreed a response to those questions. They all agreed there was no evidence of disease, which they've all said. They said there was no positive evidence of toxicological contribution to death, but they said this could not be excluded because of the limitations we discussed, that you can't test for everything at once. The witnesses agreed there was no evidence of any cause of death in relation to direct violence, and all agreed the cause of death as drowning. And then in relation to the matter we mentioned earlier, found in Noah's stomach, Dr. Turner, she witnessed the material, so she was the one who answered because the others didn't. She said it would have been in keeping with someone swallowing water on drowning, so she's huge experience. I mean, I should say these pathologists they gave details of their experience. It dates back decades, and they're hugely qualified individuals who have contributed to a number of inquests, so this is drawn on their experience too. So all three agreed that he would have been alive when he entered the water, and they said the bruise in his head could have happened within the system, and it might, as we heard, be the immediate precursor to drowning. The witnesses also said any assessment on concussion would need to be made by a neurological expert, so they're not qualified to make a definitive assessment on that. They said it was unlikely he sustained a head injury from his earlier fall, that's off the bike on North Queen Street, but they said it was more likely to have happened within the storm drain, and they added that in relation to the potential acute psychotic episode, the opinion of an expert psychiatrist should be sought in relation to that.
And they did say that the bruising on Noah was recent and that would have occurred within 24 hours of his death, which would match the statement that they gave that they thought that it could have been in the culvert. And the pathologists were also asked if they could determine the time of death.
Mm-hmm. I've heard this in a number of different inquests that I've covered where time of death, and always the pathologists revert back to TV films where people see these inquests and see these autopsies where the time of death is pinpointed. And what Dr. Crane said is that's not the case. The experts all said that it's extremely complex to try and identify a time of death, and it's even more difficult when the body's recovered from the water. And they were then asked about the absence of samples of nearby water to compare with that found in Noah's stomach, and this is something that's cropped up in today's evidence. They said the absence of those water samples did not impact on the post-mortem, other than that had they been positive, had they matched, they would have supported the diagnosis. But they said it didn't have any impact on the actual conclusion itself. The witnesses all agreed it was a most unusual case, and they added there was nothing to indicate the involvement of a third party again, but did accept it couldn't be completely excluded. So again, there's no evidence to support that, but they can't totally exclude it, and that's something that a lot of experts would normally say.
And there was a document read to the jury that indicated the witnesses' responses to some further question relating to the drug, which is known as spice. So how did they respond to those?
Yeah, spice, I think what we heard in court was that it's designed to imitate the effects of cannabis, but that can be more potent. So the questions were asked about the nature of the drug. This was a kind of question, or a set of questions that were given to the pathologists after they given their initial statements. And they were asked kind of direct questions about it and what impact it could have on, for example, a 14-year-old boy who the words he used were drug naive. Dr. Crane's response, he said spice could be sprayed onto vegetation, paper, or it could be smoked in vapes. He said it could be ingested or smoked. He said he was unable to comment on Noah's case specifically, and that should be left to, as he said, an expert or a psychiatrist. But he said the effects of the drug, which, as we said, are intended to imitate the effects of cannabis, he said they'd be more potent and unpredictable than cannabis. He also said smoking the drug will lead to the fastest effects. And then Dr. Carey, in his response, he said the drug could be taken by either smoking or it could be taken by eating vegetative material. He also said assessment of its effect in relation to Noah would be, again, best directed to an expert psychiatrist. Dr. Carey said the speed of that intoxication would depend on how it was taken. And Professor Turner, she also responded, but she said she didn't have the appropriate experience to comment on those points.
There was a photo of Noah's body shown to the jury. What did it show specifically?
The photo, it wasn't shown directly to the media, but we're aware of it from being passed around. It showed Noah's face and some of the injuries that were on his face, particularly the bruising on his forehead. And the reason obviously it was given out is so they could discuss that bruising on the forehead. And Dr. Turner said, as she said in her previous evidence, that the bruising would have been caused by blunt impact, so something hitting the body, or in this case his head. She said, Dr. Crane, then he pointed out that the bruising would have enlarged over time, so it may have maybe got bigger in the time he's been in the culvert or the area of it. And Professor Carey, or Dr. Carey, he clarified the broadness of the area meant it was very unlikely it had been caused by a weapon. And Dr. Turner backed that assessment up. She said that you can get blunt bruising from a weapon, but the pattern doesn't suggest that at all. So she's looking at the evidence in front of her and determining that pattern doesn't suggest that. Mr. Call, then, he asked about Noah's fall from the bike. He asked whether that could have actually caused the injury. And Dr. Turner said she didn't think so because he would have had to impact at the ground with his forehead. At that point, we know he had a helmet on. And she said that would have offered some degree of protection for his head. And again, she added he didn't appear to be showing any effects from the fall. If the jury's seen the CCTV where he gets back on, the jury's heard evidence from eyewitnesses that said he got straight back up and got on his bike. So she said it made it very unlikely it was sustained at that point. And Dr. Crane, he also added, so it was kind of, it's interesting this way this hot tubbing worked, because you had one, it would be directed at one witness, and then the others would be asked whether they agreed with that or they had anything to add. So at this point, Dr. Crane, he noted that the rough surface of the road would have caused different abrasions or scrapes around Noah's head, and he noted that there weren't any in that case.
And then the witnesses were asked about the potential concussive effect of an injury like this. This is a theory that has been spread that maybe perhaps Noah did fall and retained a concussion.
I think this question related more to their assessment that it happened within the culvert. So Dr. Turner, she said it wasn't possible to be definitive of the effect of concussion on an individual because obviously everyone's different. But she said the blow would have been of an extent that it would have caused concussive symptoms. She said it potentially could have caused someone to be unconscious, but you can't be definitive from post-mortem findings. And Dr. Crane, again, he added then that the pathological examination of the brain wouldn't really have helped when it came to diagnosing concussion. Dr. Carey said it would be unlikely the impact occurred when he fell off his bicycle. And he noted, as we've discussed there, that he cycled off and he had good coordination at that point.
The pathologists were then asked about the potential effects of hypothermia. Was that considered as a cause of death?
Hypothermia is something that's been mentioned in previous evidence. If we think back to Inspector Minari, who crawled through the culvert during the early period of the search, he talked about how cold it was and how that constant exposure to those conditions could have created hypothermia. Dr. Turner said it was very difficult to be sure about hypothermia. She talked about these kind of black spots that would be seen on some of the body's organs. She said the signs of that weren't present in Noah's body. And Dr. Crane talked about the fallen body temperature that comes with hypothermia. He said that may have caused confusion or disorientation, which again was mentioned by Inspector Minari in his evidence. And his words were the likelihood that he succumbed to drowning more quickly than the period it would have taken for hypothermia to develop. So the point he's making there is that hypothermia takes time to set in, and the likelihood that they've drawn from this is that he died of drowning before hypothermia could have set in.
It said it makes him more susceptible to it, but I think drowning overtakes hypothermia. In the case of Noah, was a time of death actually determined?
The short answer is no. And again, all the pathologists mentioned that it's very, very difficult to determine the time of death in any inquest. And I've heard this in previous inquests, as I said. They said it's not like, these are Dr. Crane's words, it's not like how one sees on TV when they pinpoint a time of death. It's not like that in reality. So Mr. Call then, he, in trying to maybe push that further, he said that he asked whether Dr. Turner felt it was likely Noah's death occurred closer to him entering the culvert rather than closer to him being found on June 27th. And Dr. Turner, she responded and said it's more likely he died closer to when he was last seen, so when he entered the culvert.
So at this point, what are we expecting to come over the course of the next week?
Well, so far these three pathologists, they've had their statements read into evidence. They've answered questions from Peter Call on behalf of the coroner. There's several other properly interested parties who will have to ask questions. So one of those is Brenda Campbell KC on behalf of Fiona Donohoe, Donal Lunny KC on behalf of the PSNA. And given a lot of the evidence relates to the culvert, we will probably hear from Nessa Murnahan KC from the Department for Infrastructure as well. So I imagine these three witnesses, they'll be back tomorrow morning, and I imagine they'll face questions for quite a lengthy period because their evidence in many ways is crucial to this inquest.
Liam Tunney, thank you.
Thank you.